Okay, Boker Tov, Chodesh Tov. Today's daf is Ayin Vav 76. We pick up the bottom of Ayin Ham with Bet. We are dealing with the Mishnah that said if there's a question, the husband stipulated that his wife doesn't have blemishes, and it turns out she has blemishes. There's a whole. Then the question is, did she have these before the kiddushin, before the giving of the ring, and then the condition was not satisfied that she's not married, or after the giving of the ring, and therefore she is married? And the big difference is, even if she's married, I mean, he can divorce her, but A, she would require a get, and B, then she would get her ksufa. So that's the issue. And the Mishnah basically said that it depends whether the blemishes were found when she was in her father's house before the chuppah, or after she was in her husband's house after the chuppah. When she's in her father's house, it's her burden of proof. When it's in her husband's house, it's his burden of proof. Wasn't exactly clear why any of that should make a difference. And the first answer of the Gemara was basically, you're right. The Mishnah sort of are two separate opinions stapled together, which is a very strange answer. Now the Gemara gives a different answer. So we pick up on the bottom of Ayin Ham with Bet, and the Gemara says like this, or the middle of Ayin Ham with Bet. The Gemara says, where were we? Rava Amar, thank you. Line starts with the word Rava. It's about 2/5 of the way from the bottom, about 20 lines from the bottom. Rava Amar, Reisha, the beginning where they're found in the father's house, and it's her burden of proof, or the father's burden of proof, is because we say, Kan nimtzu kan hayu. Here they were found, here they probably occurred, which is an interesting idea, which means since the blemishes were found in the father's house, we should assume that they were pre-existing. Okay, we found them when she was like, she really goes into two, states. She's living with her father, living with her husband. If they're found in the home, in the father's house, I mean figuratively in the father's house, right? Then we assume she had them from growing up, and therefore that's the assumption. So if she wants to prove that they came after the kiddushin, she has the burden of proof. Kanim tu kan hayu. Safe. So, and that's why. Whereas if they're found in the husband's house, we assume that they occurred once she was in this husband's house, and he has the burden of proof to prove that they're earlier. So that's an interesting presumption. Not exactly clear what the logic is, but okay. And safe nami kanim su kan hayu. And in the end, they're found in the husband's house. We presume that they occurred in the husband's house. So somehow, based on which sort of status she's in, being part of her father's house or being part of her husband's house, defines when we're going to assume this thing cropped up. We see it now. If it's in father's house, we assume she's always had it. In the husband's house, we assume it's recent. All right, so Ace for Rabbi. So Rabbi asked on that. At least that's some logic, even if we don't fully get it, at least it helps explain the difference in the Mishnah. So Rabbi asked on this. Here's what the Mishnah says. Once she had the nisuin, went into the husband's domain, so what if it's now the husband's responsibility? What does he have to prove? He has to prove that those blemishes existed from before the kiddushin, and therefore the kiddushin was an error, okay? Because that's what it means. It's the husband's now burden of proof to prove that the blemishes existed prior to the kiddushin. So ad shelo titareis id, he has to prove that they were there from before the kiddushin. Misha titareis lo, it's not enough to prove that they were there from after the kiddushin took place. So why is that true? Why shouldn't that be enough? Why is that not enough? Why not say, here's where they occur, here's where they were found, here's where they occurred, which means the following. Maybe it'll help if I diagram this a little. Okay, so here she is in her father's house. I don't know what's going to make it her father, there's smoke coming out. Anyway,
it's wintertime.
Yeah, exactly. Here she is. Okay, that's her dad. I don't know how you're going to see the difference between the dad and the husband. Okay. Yeah, I don't know. They're right there. So that's Abba. Okay. Anyway, fine. Okay. And then, anyway, somewhere here, there's the ring. There's the array at Mikudeshli. Okay. Anyway.
Does it actually appear in the Mishnah?
No. Anyway, anyway, and she stays in her father's house, and then here's the thing. Okay, and here they are standing under the chuppah. Okay, and then that's that. Then so that's her father's house, and this is the groom's house. Okay, the Baal, the Shut Haba. Okay, so here's the story. It says if she goes ahead and discovers the mumim if the moon is here discovered here when she's in her father's house, okay, that's when discovered the mumim, right? And here he made the condition. Here he said Amanat She'ein Alecha Mumim. Okay, and then it was discovered here when she was still in her father's house. Okay, so we say our presumption is Kan Nimtzu, they were found in the father's house, Kan Hayu, so they were always with her, and it's going to presume that she was married, she already had the mumim, and she has the burden of proof to prove that it happened afterwards, if they were found in the father's house. If, however, they were found here, then we assume, Kanim to Kan Hayu was found here, that's when it occurred, so presumably it occurred after the Kiddushin. It occurred in the husband's Rishus, and if the husband wants to prove that the marriage is no good, he has the burden of proof to prove they came earlier. That's what the Mishnah, that's how Rav explains the Mishnah. Here's, however, Abaye's question. Abaye's question is, let's say it was in this case. And now, because it was found when she was in the husband's Rishus, it's assumed that that's when it cropped up. And he has the burden of proof to prove it came earlier. Why does he have to prove? He's got to prove it came from here. Okay, that's what he has to prove. Says Abaye, why does he have to prove it came from before the Kiddushin? Let him just prove that it came while she was still in her father's house. Right? Let's say somebody saw her with this blemish while she was in her father's house. Let him just prove it came here, and then we'll say, once he's proven that it was seen in her father's house, kanim to kan hayu, and we can assume that it occurred even from before the Kiddushin. Right? Once the logic is that if they're discovered in the father's house, then presumably they were always with her. So when he has the burden of proof, why do you have to prove that it came from before the Kiddushin? Just prove that it was discovered, that it was seen in the father's house, right, while she was still in the father's house. And we'll say, once he can prove it was seen in the father's house, we'll presume that it always was with her. Hey, everybody get me? I'm getting a lot of blank stares, okay? So that's Abaye's question. So you explained that here the presumption is that it was from before, and she has the burden of proof. Here the presumption is that it's now, and he has the burden of proof, he the husband. But okay, he has the burden of proof, but then prove that it came during this period, and then that'll allow us to add to that the presumption that it came from earlier. So it should be enough to show that it came from that period, not necessarily that it came before. So that's Abaye's question. So let's read that again. Abaye. So Abaye asked, once she's married to the husband, it's the husband's burden of proof to prove that these blemishes happened from before the Kiddushin. And it was an error. So Achelo Titar is in. Yes, from before he has to prove from before that it existed before the Kiddushin. Mishitar is slow. It's not sufficient to prove that it happened, that it was seen, not happened obviously, but it was seen after the Kiddushin. Why wouldn't it be sufficient to prove that it was seen after the Kiddushin? Leima, once you prove that it was seen sometime while she was still in the father's house, let us add to that the presumption and say, Kanim su kan hayu. Here they were found, here they cropped up. So the Gemara says, Amarle, so Rabbi says back to him, no. Mishenit arsa, mishum de'ika lemeimar, chazak ein adam shosa because elim kein bodko. V'hai ra'avani fayesu. So it says no. Because if here, all he does is he proves that it was seen over here, then we can say, fine, it was seen over here, but we're going to presume, since it was seen over here, you actually married her, right? So good. You've proven that it was seen over here. If you've proven it was seen over here, we'll presume that you saw it also. And if you saw it also, and then you went through with the marriage. So that must mean that you were okay with it. Got it? Yeah. Meaning if it was discovered here and there was no chuppah, you could say, it's discovered. I don't want to marry her. I'm going to assume that I'm going to assume that it was batel, that you already had the mum from back here. That's that case. So then that's the presumption, and she has to prove otherwise because he wants to call it off over here. But here he's gone through with it. So if all you do is prove that it existed over here, then we're going to say, okay, great, you've proven it existed over here, but you went through with the wedding. So since you went through with the wedding, we're going to say that it's not enough to prove it existed over here.
What was a mumbanista?
What?
What if it was not going?
Let's not go there, okay? He somehow was able to demonstrate it. That meant that it was discoverable. And since it was discoverable, that it existed here, we're going to assume that you discovered it, and if you went through with the wedding, that meant you're okay with it. So that's why once the chuppah took place, it's not enough to show it existed over here, because then he doesn't matter it existed. He went through with the wedding. Okay, so let's read that again. A person doesn't drink from the cup unless he checks it out. You're not going to go through the chuppah unless you've done your due diligence. And therefore, since in this scenario you've gone through with the wedding, it's not enough to prove that it was just that it existed at that stage because you were okay with it. So you went through with the wedding. He says, well, 1 minute. If that's true, that once he goes through with the chuppah, then it shows that it doesn't matter that there was a mum because he went through with it. So then how does it do him any good to prove it existed way back here? Right? Even if you prove it existed way back here, we could say it doesn't matter. It was a mum that was discoverable. You went through with the chuppah. That should show you're okay with it. Right? So we never say that just because he went through with the chuppah, he loses any right to claim that there was a problem. Right? So if even though he went through the chuppah, if it was demonstrated that the problem existed before the kiddushin, he could say the kiddushin was no good, etc. Then even if why isn't it enough to demonstrate it occurred here? And then we'll presume that it existed before the kiddushin. Yeah, everybody got it? Okay. Okay. Okay, so the Gemara says Ella. So why don't we say it in the case when he's proven it existed before the kiddushin? Even though we could say that a person doesn't, won't drink from the cup unless he checks it out, meaning so he must have been okay with it. The counter argument to that he must have been okay with it is, no, actually, blemishes are a serious issue, especially if he's making a stipulation that there can't be blemishes, and he wouldn't have gone through with it had he known there were blemishes. So it must mean that he didn't know that there were blemishes. You want to argue, I'm sure he knew, and in the end he was okay. Counter argument is, no, he stipulated against it, and blemishes are a big deal, and therefore he wouldn't have been okay, and it must be he didn't know. So even though he went through with the chuppah, you cannot use that by itself to argue he must have been okay with it, because there's a counter argument too. Okay, so if that's not enough to say he must have been okay once he's proven that the problem existed before the kiddushin, so even if he can prove the problem existed here, let it say, okay, but going through with a chuppah isn't evidence that he's okay. And if he proves it existed here, then we can presume it existed earlier. Okay,
yes. Presumption give him like some kind of extra duty to check out.
Yeah, so of course that's the point, which is that you're right. Meaning, okay, maybe there are times he won't be okay with it, but maybe he's got to really demonstrate. He's got more responsibility to demonstrate that there is a presumption that he did know about it since it was knowable and that he was okay with it. You're right. I mean, so the point is, it is totally reasonable to say that even though Chazaka Einar Mefayis B'mumim, if it was something that he knew about and he could have known about, we're just going to assume that he did know about it. Okay, but the point then is that if that were true, then anytime there was a chuppah, he loses all rights. Okay, and that's not what we say. Right? We say even after there's a chuppah, if he proved that it was if it really was a problem, he wins. So why not just prove it was here? Right? Once we say that there are counterbalancing arguments in terms of what the chuppah actually means.
So really, this sugya, in a sense, is a sugya about competing presumptions. You had 4 chazakot.
Right. Well, yeah, I know. That's an excellent point. I know. It's an excellent point.
Like the whole thing is an interplay of the legal force of competing presumptions.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I'm going to say something about the 4 presumptions in a minute.
I presumed you would.
So let's see what the Gemara says. Okay. Okay. Ella mishenit arsa. So now exactly the Gemara is going to be very much spell out exactly what Rabbi Deo just said.
Did you do Hakanami?
So therefore, the same way, the getting married doesn't like make him lose his claim if he proved it existed from before the kiddushin. It shouldn't make him lose his claim if he presumes it existed shows it existed after the kiddushin. Once we can assume that if it's found in the father's house, it will assume that it existed beforehand, then that should continue to be a good point here. Okay, and just having done the chuppah doesn't make him lose his claim. So Ella Mishanitarsa. Here's why he doesn't have a claim once they had the kiddushin. Once if the mumim were discovered after the kiddushin. I mean, he demonstrated that there was a chuppah, but he demonstrated that there were mumim from in the father's house. Mishum de'ika tarti. There are two things that argue in favor of the woman. Number one, assume that the body has its presumptive state, and we're assuming that these are new blemishes. I mean, new that she wasn't born with him. So therefore, since she wasn't born with him, we'll assume that she only got them at the latest stage possible. That's the cheskas haguf. Her body didn't start with these, so we'll assume they came as late as possible. And the presumption that he wouldn't have gone through with the chuppah unless he knew what he was getting himself into. The high Ra'avin Ifayisu. So, and he saw, and he was okay with it. Okay, so when they're found here, okay, we basically say there are two. He discovered it here. He has the burden of proof. If he just proves that it existed here, we could say okay. But there are two things that argue in her favor. Number one is her cheskas haguf makes us presume that it occurred as late as possible. So that pushes us and saying that we'll assume it happened only after the kiddushin. They were found after the kiddushin. The cheskas haguf reinforces that, makes us assume as late as possible. That's one thing that argues in her favor. Cheskas haguf argues after the kiddushin, and the other thing that argues in her favor is he went through with the wedding. Okay, 1 minute. We got to figure the argument. Maya Marta, what will you say that's on his side of the equation? Chazaka ain't out of mefayis b'mumim. That no, that even though he went through with the wedding, he probably wouldn't be okay with the fact that it's a real blemish. Have a chada b'makam tarti. It's 1 against 2. The chada b'makam tarti lo amrinan. And 1 against 2, we don't say. Ad shelo titares hemed gufa chetzkaso. So ad shelo tit. Okay, fine. That's point number 1. So basically, if it's found here, okay, the fact that he went through with the chuppah is an argument in her favor. The fact that ein adam mefayes b'mumim sort of neutralizes that. So those two arguments are neutralized. Fine. So the chuppah aspect is neutralized. But what she does have in her favor is cheskas haguf. It was found here, and the cheskas haguf reinforces the likelihood that it was not earlier, that it was only when it was found. And let's just finish this argument. That's when it was found here, and he proves it occurred here. Ad shelo titares. But if he proved that it existed here, okay, then you can't say, oh, her cheskas haguf proves that it was after, reinforces that it was after the kiddushin. He's demonstrated that it was before the kiddushin, right? He's demonstrated the problem really existed, okay? So when he proves it here, the problem clearly existed. Now you have to somehow prove that it's not a problem. So Ma'ika, what could you say? So what she's going to say is, although you proved that the problem was here, you wouldn't have married me unless you were okay with it. No, that's neutralized with the argument of and you must have been okay with it. No, Adarabba. No, that's neutralized by the presumption that a man wouldn't be okay with blemishes, especially if he stipulated. And therefore, he is. If you want to take the money away from him, you've got to prove it. So basically, what it says is like this: the idea that he went through with the chuppah, okay, and that should be a mark in her favor, is neutralized by the counter argument that a guy isn't going to be okay with a blemish, especially if he stipulated against it. So basically, the argument for and against here gets neutralized, okay? So when he demonstrates that it's here, it's presumed to be here because she has a cheskas haguf. So she wins, okay, even though she's coming to take money away from him. When he demonstrates it's here, she has nothing in her favor. Right, the thing in her favor about the chuppah is neutralized with the ein adam, that a person isn't okay with blemishes. So when it's shown here, then it's shown that it really is a mekach tos. Okay, so that's how the Gemara has basically answered it. Now, what Tosa says is 1 second. Tosa says basically what you have done is you've neutralized the meaning of the chuppah. Right, that's what you've done. You've neutralized the chuppah. One argument is in her favor, one argument's in his favor. You've neutralized it. So we're back down to the fact that if you prove it here, obviously the guy's going to win. If you prove it here, she's going to win. Okay? So Tosa says, back to question number 1. Why is it any different when it's actually found in her house? When it's found in her house and it's over here, we don't say the cheskas haguf makes her win. We say kan nimtzu, kan hayu. That if it's found in her house, we assume that it came from before. So we're like back to square one. right? Remember, that's where we started. We started why, when it's found in her house, before there was ever a chuppah, does the kala have the burden of the proof? And we say, because when it's found in her house, even if it's found here, we assume if it's found here, that must have been where it started. Everybody, you with me?
Yeah.
So even though there's a cheskas haguf that would reinforce the idea that it was after the kiddush, and we say, no, if it's found in the house, we assume it always had it. So we're back to square one. So say the same thing here. It was found after the chuppah. He discovered it. He can prove it existed here. You want to say cheskas haguf reinforces it was late. Whatever happened to the argument of kanim to kanhayu, right? It's a pretty good question.
Yeah.
So the Gemara did a lot of moving of the pieces around, but then we're back to the question. It says, okay, here there's a cheskas haguf that makes her win. So let that cheskas haguf work, even if it was found right, in her house. So here's what Tosas says. Tosas says, listen to what, and this gets into the four chazakas. Tosas says, in this case, where there was already a nisuin, there are four things that are counteracting each other, right? One is, presumably, if he would have got married, that proves he was okay with it. The counter thing is Ein Adam Mefayis B'mumim, right? And the other thing is this issue about there's a cheskas haguf, and against that is the chazaka of kanim to kanhayu. So there's all these things that counteract each other, right? Getting chuppah, but it proves you're okay. Against that is Ein Adam Mefayis B'mumim. Finding it here is a cheskas haguf, but against that is kanim to kanhayu. Okay, so it says they should all sort of it says here's the difference. In the case that they had the chuppah, in order for him to win the case, he has to prove both points. He has to win both. It's like an and or an or. Two things have to be true for him to win in this case. Number one is he has to show that he wasn't okay with it, just going through with the chuppah, right? That has to be number one. And number two is he has to say that kanim to kanhayu, it must have occurred from before. For her to win, only one of those has to be correct. Either it's enough that even if he had the problem, it's enough that going through the chuppah shows he was okay, or it's enough that he didn't have the problem, right? That the problem occurred only afterwards. So that's why this is better. In this case, where he went through with the chuppah, this is a brilliant point. When he went through with the chuppah, it's not like, okay, it neutralizes, then we're back to square one. If he went through the chuppah now, in order for him to win, two conditions have to be met. You have to show that going through the chuppah does not mean that he was okay with it, that he was mochel. I understand, but the point is, for him, it's A and B have to be true. A has to be true, that going through with the chuppah does not mean he was okay with it, and B has to be true, that the problem existed prior to the kiddushin. For her to win in this case, only A or not B have to be true. Remember your prepositional logic? A and B, that not A or not B. Either, right? For her to win, either maybe the condition did exist earlier, but going through with the chuppah shows he's okay, or the condition didn't exist earlier. So that's why in this case, she's going to win unless he can prove it existed from before. The weight of the chuppah, it doesn't just get automatically neutralized from the counter argument. It means that he has to prove two things now. He has to have two things to be true in order for him to win. Whereas if they did not have a chuppah yet, he only has to be one thing to be true that he didn't win, which is that though it was found here, we're going to presume it existed earlier. But as soon as he went through with the chuppah, now he's got to prove that two things are true in order for him to win. And that's why, until he can prove it occurred back here, he's going to lose. Yes.
So my question is this. I mean, we seem to be applying this to all mumim, but to me, it doesn't make sense that we can do that. Like, the only thing I can really see that happening is with the mole thing. That can happen at any time. Let's
right.
The limbs.
Yeah.
She didn't suddenly grow.
Right. So we're saying that. All this is talking in a case where it's something that is not congenital. Okay. Now, of course, the question is, let's say it's not clear whether it's congenital or not. Okay. Anyway, so I'll read you the key line. It's v'chada, but if you look at the first wide line of the middle-sized lines of Tosfos, the first middle line, in the middle of the line, he says, v'od yesh lefarish, mishum hachi ki havi travaya b'hadi hadadi adife tamei ha'isha mishum afilu lo ye'elach echad mehem emet. As long as all she needs to have is one of those things to be true. O cheskas haguf, which makes it show that the mum came after the kiddushin. O ein adam shor tebekos, ein adam shor tebekos, or the fact that there was a chuppah shows he was okay. As long as one of those are true, she wins. So in that case, yesh la ksuva. Of a baal for him to say that he's out of the problem, lo mifter el ashu kol atamim shelo. He has to have A and B be true. MS. Shim echad mehem sheker. If one of them is false, either the chuppah shows he was okay with it, or the problem came after the kiddushin. Mafsid habal. Hilkakari tami habal min tami haisha. Very brilliant. Okay, so yeah, it is a big difference adding this. In the end, if you just said this part, the whole question would be, did it come here? Did it come earlier? And we're going to say, if it was found in the father's house, then that's enough to make us assume it came earlier, that she can't win in terms of trying to get money out of him. Okay, but if you had this element, now only for her, only one of two possibilities have to be true, whereas for him, both possibilities have to be true. Yeah, Charlie.
Normally, to get money in a property case, you have to have the preponderance of evidence on your side.
Yeah.
But this is sounding like, if you think it's a property case, it might not be following that rule because it's 2 versus 1.
Yeah.
You still get your ketubah if either of those.
It's sort of like a svek, right? If you sort of think about it that way, right? It's like a svek. Like it's, for you to be right, both A and B have to be right. For me, right? So we normally don't use a logic of svek by like Mummin, but that certainly would seem like a preponderance of evidence. That's what Tosas is saying. We have a lot of things in doubt, but for the, if you just want to do let's assume everything is a 50-50 likelihood, right? Then for A and B to be true, that's only 25% of the likelihood, right? And for for any other combination, it's a 75% chance. So yeah.
Two questions. One, how does one prove or disprove that he's reconciled to the moon or not reconciled to the moon? And you prove that.
You don't.
And second,
right.
Well, that's a key issue.
Well, no, but because you raise that as another possibility, it gives more weight to her side.
But this, Lamaisa, this didn't happen like in court. Everybody presents their arguments. It was serial. I mean, the last thing that occurred was the chuppah. Uh-huh. So all the responsibilities of being bodeg should come just before the chuppah really should seal the deal.
Well, you're basically just saying the fact that you had a chuppah shows you're okay. But basically, imagine what happens. They come the next morning into court. He says, I discovered these mumim. I explicitly made it tanai. That's it. The kiddushin was never chal. The whole thing is off. I don't have to pay a ksufa. And she says, no, first of all, this mum only happened after the kiddushin. Number 2, buddy, you went through with the chuppah. That shows you knew what you were getting yourself into. No, had I ever known that it was a mum, I wouldn't whatever. And then they all argue the whole thing out. How are we supposed to figure out which is which? So basically, that's what the Linzer says. He has a lot more to prove to say that there was no kiddushin than she does. Okay. Yes.
Then just going back to the concept of being reconciled or accepting of a mum, it's a personal thing. I mean, how can you general cloud?
So, that's an interesting question, right? About like whether you could bring conversations that he had, other types of things to show whether he would have been okay or wouldn't have been okay. But I don't know if that ever was intended to be proved. Whether Ein Adam Shose Elim Case Mamida or Ein Adam Fayes. My sense was that because those are like counter arguments in theory, that just means that shifts the burden of proof. Therefore, if you, the guy, want to, after you've gone through with the chuppah, because there's a possibility that signals that you're okay regardless, if you want to win this case, you're going to have to prove it in much more absolute terms. You're going to have to prove that it existed before the kiddushin. Proving that it existed after the kiddushin is not going to be enough to win, because the fact that you went through with the chuppah sort of shifts more of the burden of weight of evidence on you. So that might be, without sort of saying 2 things true, 1 thing true, an easier way to say this is, once you've gone through the chuppah, that signals that you're okay. So if you now want to prove that it never was good, you got the burden of proof. She doesn't have the burden.
When we say okay, it's all relative. I mean, either way, the marriage is dissolved. It just depends on whether you say
no.
Didn't we say it was that the Mishnah? The Tanai was, if the Tanai, it depends what it is. Either way, it's either Teitze B'Ktuva or not, but it's always Teitze.
Teitze means that if he divorces her, he pays the Ksuva. It doesn't mean that there's no marriage. He has to give her a get. Okay, and he can choose not to. All right, so that's basically, so the easy way, this argument really boils down to, it got confusing, but if you just think about it in terms of burden of proof, what it boils down to is the following. When the problem was found in her house, then it's assumed that then she's got the burden of proof. Once he goes through with, because she's trying to take, get money from him. Once he marries her, then there's a presumption that maybe you're okay with it anyway, and therefore the burden of proof shifts to be his burden of proof, okay? Since that gives us a presumption that, hey, it could be he was okay with it even if there was a problem. So if he wants to actually argue that he wants to show it's a problem, it becomes now his burden of proof. That's Rava's reading. Now the Gemara comes on. It says like this. Rav Ashi says, here's the explanation of the difference of whether it was found in the husband's house or in the father's house. Reisha, in the first case, where she has the burden of proof, mana la'abba biyadcha. If she's still in her father's house, it means that she's a minor. Conceptually, she's in her father's house. It's not just that there's no nisuin, but it means she's still a katana or a nara. So who gets the ksuva? If a guy were to marry a woman and divorce her, kiddushin and gerushin, without nisuin, just kiddushin, she's still in the father's house, and then divorce her, who gets the ksuva? The father gets the ksuva. So therefore, in this case, when it's found in his house, and then he says, oh my God, there's this mum, forget it, I don't want to marry you, the kiddushin never was chal. She says, what do you mean? Of course it was chal. So I only got this mum later. So she's basically saying she knows what happened to her body. She says, I know when I got this mum, I got it later. But she's arguing on behalf of the father. The father is the one who's going to be collecting the ksuva. So basically, you're arguing on behalf of the person who knows the information, the woman, and whose body it occurred to, is the one making the claim, because she can claim that this mum came later, but it's for the sake of somebody who doesn't know the information and whose body it didn't happen to, the father. So that weakens her claim. Okay, and therefore she has to prove, it's not enough to say it, she's got to really prove that it came later. Where were we? Reisha manal abba biyadcha. You owe my father $100. The seifa, in the end, after nisuin, she's her own person. So then when she's arguing, she's saying mana li biyadcha. Okay, you owe me $100, and since she's making the claim for herself after nisuin, then she's in a stronger position. All right, so that's his answer. Now the Gemara has a question. So Rav Rav asked Rav Ashi, although this Prosefta we're going to ask really is a question, could be a question on anyone, not just on Rav Ashi. Let's take a look. Mode Rabbi Meir b'mumim haru'uyim lavo imam ibeit aviha she'al ha'av lahavi raya. So Rabbi Meir concedes. There's a whole question of who is he conceding to, because it doesn't seem connected to the debate of Rabbi Meir and the Chachamim in the Mishnah. Let's not worry about that. But anyway, here's a point that it is true that if she has a blemish that would be assumed to come from her from the father's house, shala'av lahavi raya, that it becomes the father's responsibility. So even if it's found in the husband's house, we assume what this means is, but if it's the type of a blemish that could have been there from before, right? It's not a more recently developed blemish. It's a type of a blemish that it's reasonable to assume was there from before. Then it becomes the father's responsibility to prove that it existed after the kiddushin. Okay, so the Gemara says, why is that? We've been saying that it's always going to be the husband's responsibility. So the Gemara says, why not just say, like you've been saying, that once she's in the husband's house, she's making a claim on her own behalf, and even though it's possible this blemish pre-existed, it's possible that it's new, or even if it's possible that it cropped up in the father's house, it could have cropped up after the kiddushin. So, this basically changes everything. Until now, we've been saying once it's in the husband's house, it's the husband's burden of responsibility. Now we're saying, oh no, but if it's a type of blemish that could have been from before, it's not the husband's responsibility. Why not? How is all the other arguments we made not legitimate arguments? Just because it's possible it's from before, even if it was from before, maybe it came from after the kiddushin. So the Gemara's answer is, and now Michael's going to be very happy. The Gemara's answer is, it's something like congenital. It's like an extra finger. Okay, so if it's congenital, okay, then of course it doesn't matter whose house it was discovered in. I mean, I don't know how you kept it hidden. Maybe it was an extra toe, okay? But it was congenital, then who cares whose house it was discovered in? It pre-existed, and therefore it was before the kiddushin, and the husband wins. So that's what we're talking about. So the Gemara says, Yeseres Maraya Maisi. So if that's true, what does it mean? Oh, now it's the kala and the father's responsibility to bring a proof. What proof could they bring? Obviously, it was there from the time of the kiddushin. It was an extra toe. So the Gemara says no. What proof are they bringing? So Maraya Maisi, Raya Derav and Ifayasu. No, then they can try to bring evidence that no, he knew about it. Right? She showed him the extra toe. We have witnesses that she showed him. He said, I don't care about that. That would be the evidence. Okay. So now what the Gemara is introduced at the end is that it matters if it's congenital. Obviously, that shifts everything. then of course it was there at the time of the Kiddushin. And the only question is, can you prove that he was okay with it? Okay, but presumably if it's not congenital, then even though it's possible she had it for a very long time, then the question becomes who has the burden of proof. And bottom line, the Mishnah says, if it's found in her house, she has the burden of proof. If it's found after the chuppah, he has the burden of proof. What's the difference? So we basically have two answers. One answer is that after the chuppah, that creates a presumption that he was okay with it, and now that shifts the burden of proof. Okay, or the other answer is that whether she's making a claim for her father or making a claim for herself. All right. Yes.
This entire sugya presumes something about her age. Could she be a Bulgarian?
Yeah,
living
if
in
she
her
would be
father's house?
So if it's the issue whether she's making a claim for herself or her father, then being a Bogeret would make a difference, because then she would be making a claim for herself before the chuppah. If the issue was that the act of the chuppah creates a presumption that he was okay with it, then it wouldn't matter if she's a Bogeret. You're right. So that would be a big difference based on those two answers. Okay, now we're going to talk about now since we have this case so clear, we're going to talk about an analogous case, okay, and see how we can apply it or not. Amar Rav Yehuda Mishmuel, said Rav Yehuda in the name of Shmuel. Hamachlif para b'chamor. Okay, so I am changing, selling you my cow for your donkey.
This is like your first parak of Kiddush.
Exactly. Umashach bala chamor tapara. So no, excuse me. I'm buying your cow for my donkey. I'm buying your cow for my donkey. So I go ahead and I take your cow. I take Bessie into
we're like bartering, right?
Right. Well, right. Swapping. Anyway, I go ahead and I take Bessie into my barn. Okay, and I haven't yet delivered my donkey. Okay. Umashach bala chamor tapara. So he speak bala para limshoch et hachamor. Now you, Charlie, that you owned Bessie, and now you gave Bessie to me, and now you have not yet come and taken my donkey from me. Okay, and we go back to my yard to get my donkey, and what do we discover? Shemei tachamor. And then we go to get the donkey, and we find that the donkey has died. Okay, so there we were. It was Sunday noon. You gave me Bessie. Then we walk over to my house. It's 12:30, and we see that the donkey is dead. So the question is, when did the donkey die? If the donkey died after 12 o'clock, then Charlie, it was your donkey that died, and that's your problem, right? If the donkey died before 12 o'clock, then when I took Bessie there, it was a dead donkey, and the deal was off. Okay, so the question is, when did the donkey die? After the deal was sealed and finalized, because as soon as I took Bessie, that finalizes the deal. But if the donkey is dead, obviously it's not a good deal. Or did it die? So if it died before, the deal is no good. If it died after, the deal is good, and you're stuck with a dead donkey.
Variables, right? Like maybe you conceal that this was like a.
All right, so we'll assume that it got struck by lightning. We discover that a car hit it. Whatever. Let's bracket all the other variables. Okay, so what's the halacha? Who has the burden of proof, me or you, to prove when the donkey died?
Certainly we know one thing.
What?
The donkey does not have the burden of proof.
Exactly. Although it is a beast of burden. Right, exactly. So the Gemara says like this. Okay, so Abala chamur lahavi raya shaya chamura kayam b'shat meshichat para. I have the burden of proof to prove to you that my donkey was still alive when I took the cow, and to prove that the sale went through. Now that's a little bit funny, because think about what we should assume. As far as everybody saw, at the time that we did the sale, there was a presumption that it was a good sale. Also, I'm in possession of the cow, right? So I'm in possession of the cow, and there's a presumption of a good sale. And we're saying, nevertheless, we have to assume the sale is no good until I can prove that the sale actually went through. Okay? What? That the donkey died. That the donkey died later.
That's like the
what? Right. That's the third point too. Is that the presumption? All of those things are in my favor, and nevertheless, that's a good point. So there's three presumptions. A, there's a presumption with a good sale. B, I'm in possession of the cow. So I said that should count for a lot, because the other side has to now try to take the cow away from me. And right, there's nothing that there's a presumption that the donkey just died at the last moment. Cheskas will go for the donkey, and all those things. And nevertheless, I have to prove it. So that's pretty strange.
That's like saying the woman is under the chuppah and still.
Well, that's what the Gemara is going. Well, let's take a look exactly. So the Gemara is going to say the Tana Tuna, and we taught a Mishnah. Our Mishnah teaches Kala. We have a Mishnah that supports it. The Mishnah of the Kala, which is our Mishnah. So the Gemara says, "Hi Kala." Which case of the Kala? Because there was a case where it was her proof, and there was a case where it was the husband's proof. Ilema Kala b'veisa viha. Okay, if it's the case where the kala was in the father's house and it's her proof. Okay, so what do we see there? In that case, we see she's coming to take out the money, and she's got the burden of proof. Okay, but when it says she's got the burden of proof because she's coming to take money from the husband. Midami, who could compare it? Hasam Maisi Avraya Umafi. There, the father has to bring the proof in order to extract money. Hacha Maisi Bachamor Raya Umakim. Here you're saying the owner of the donkey has to bring the burden of proof to keep the cow. So that's not similar. That seems to be a very different case that you need to bring the proof. So Amar Rabbi Ava, fine. Let's go to the second case. This is going the way Rashi reads it on the assumption that the first half and the second half of the Mishnah are arguing on one another. So let's ignore the first half. Let's just focus on the second half of the Mishnah, where it's the chassan's obligation. So the chassan is the one who has the money, and nevertheless, it's his burden of proof. So that's similar to this case of the cow and the donkey. I got the cow, but I still have to prove it was a good sale. So the Gemara says, it's still not similar. Okay, there, why does the husband have a burden of proof? Because the father and the bride have a chazaka. What chazaka do they have? A cheskes aguf, which would make us presume that the blemish occurred only at the latest time possible. So if there's a responsibility, if there's an obligation of proof, a burden of proof on the husband, even though he's the one with the money, it's because there's an argument in favor of the bride that the blemish came, later. She has a cheskes aguf. That's why the husband could have a burden of proof. Hacha. Here you're telling that the owner of the donkey has to bring a proof, not only that he already has the cow, but also like not only that he's the one that has the chazaka, right? He's the one that there's a presumption that the donkey died later. So it's crazy. He's got the cow. There's a presumption the donkey died later. That's dissimilar to all the cases in the Mishnah. Whoever has the obligation of proof in the Mishnah has one thing going against them. Either they don't have the money or they don't have the chazaka. In this case, he's both got the money and the chazaka. Okay? Right. So, Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, Kala b'veis avia u'lekidushin. No. We're going to bring it from when she's in the father's house and she has the burden of proof. So she has the chazaka going for her, and nevertheless she has the burden of proof. But why does she have the burden of proof? Because she's coming to take money from the chassan. He says, no. There's one money that she's not coming to take from the chassan, she's just trying to keep in her own, that she already has and she's trying to keep. You know what she's trying to keep that she already got? The pruta that was given over for the kiddushin, the ring. Okay? So he's trying to say the t'nai wasn't met, the kiddushin wasn't never binding. Not only am I not paying you ksuva, give me back my ring. And she's saying, no, the moon came later, and you got to, if you want to divorce me, you got to give me the ksuva, and I'm keeping my ring. So in that case, when we look at the question of the ring, okay, she's got the chazaka in her favor. She's got the cheskes aguf that the moon came later. She's got the ring in her possession, and we're assuming that she's got to prove her case even just to keep the ring. So similarly, in this case, he's got the cow in his possession. He's got the chazaka that the donkey died later. Nevertheless, if you want to keep the cow, you want to keep the thing that was given to you on the assumption that this was a good transaction, you've got the burden of proof. Now, it doesn't explain why, logically why. Yeah. If you got the chazaka, cheskes mamon, and the chazaka, why should you have to? But somehow we're saying, since the ring or the cow was only given to you on the presumption that it was a good transaction, we don't look at you as if you're really in possession of the ring. You're really in possession of the cow. Because that's exactly what the question is. It's different when the wife wants to take money from me. It clearly is my money. She's just saying that I have to pay the ksuva. But there's no question that's my money. She's just claiming that I now have a debt to her. But in terms of the ring or the cow, is that really, is that really the bride's ring? Is that really the guy's cow? That's what the question is, whether it was a good transaction and whether it really is yours. So that's what we're saying is similar. That even though you have the ring and you got the cow, and even though you've got a chazaka, you still have a burden of proof because it really isn't your ring yet. It really isn't your cow yet. That's what the question is. So even there, so the same way we're going to assume that the kala has to prove in order to keep the ring, even though she's got a chazaka in her favor, that the blemish came later. Here too, the guy's got to prove to keep the cow, even though he's got a chazaka, that the donkey died later.
So that clearly indicates that his giving her the ring and his being machnis her into chuppah are really two different things.
Well, of course, there's kiddushin and isuin.
No. But fundamental. In other words, because otherwise you could make a parallel argument. In other words, he gave her the ring. He brought her into the chuppah. You have to assume that was okay with him.
No. You're getting back to chazaka and whatever, but we're not dealing that. We're dealing even in the case where it was found before the chuppah. Okay, and it's found in her house. She's got a burden of proof. There's no chuppah. It was kiddushin. A day later, it was discovered, and whatever, and that's the issue. Let's just see the answer. Finish it up in the Gemara. Okay, so kiddushin. Below tema leave the mandar kiddushin lovely tibuin. So there's a debate in the Gemara whether what's the story. Like, there's a big question, right? If an engagement breaks off, whatever, you have to give the engagement ring back. You have to give the gifts back that were given during that whole dating period. So this is the question in the Gemara. Do we say the kiddushin, meaning the money given for the kiddushin, I'll call it the ring, was sort of sunk in the ocean, litibuim, to be sunk or not? Meaning once you give it, there you go. Once you give it, even if for some reason, let's say here's another scenario the Gemara deals with. The guy gives it, and then he drops dead. Before there was a chuppah. There was no chuppah. He dropped dead. So what do we assume? Do we assume that he was only giving the ring on the presumption that it would continue into the chuppah? And if it didn't continue into the chuppah, she's got to give the ring back to the estate because the guy dropped dead a day later? Or do we assume, no, he gave her the ring, that was meant for her to keep, whatever were to happen afterwards? And that's the question, whether we say the ring is given to be sunk, and therefore whatever happens afterwards, she keeps it, or it's not given to be sunk. So it says like this. Below tema leave the mandar kiddushin lav the nitnu. This is not only going the idea that whether there was a blemish or not a blemish, and she has to give the ring back. Not only according to the one that says that the ring isn't given to be sunk, even according to the idea that says the ring is given to be sunk, meaning that if afterwards, for example, he dies and there's no chuppah, she keeps the ring. Even so, that's not in this case. Hani mili kiddushay vadai. That's when the kiddushin was definitely good. And then, like I said, he died the day after. Then maybe she could keep the ring. Ava kiddushay toes. But in this case, the point was there was no kiddushin to begin with. I made a condition. The condition wasn't met. I don't want you to keep the ring if there was never kiddushin. It's one thing to say, once there was a kiddushin, keep the ring no matter what happens afterwards. But here there was no kiddushin. Imaisi raya in. If she can prove that the kiddushin was good and the blemish came later, then she can keep the ring. Ilolo, and if not, not. Okay? So here basically the argument is that in this case of the kala, she's got to prove it when it's found in her house, even just to keep the ring. Because even by the ring, she's not really considered, even though she's physically in possession, since it came from him, and the question is whether that was a good transaction or not, she's not considered in full possession of it, and she has to prove it, even though she has a chazak on her side. And similarly, by the case of the donkey and the cow, even though he's in possession of the cow, okay, since his possession of the cow is only because of the presumption that the transaction worked, he's got to prove that the transaction was good. Okay, so now let's see what the Gemara says. Meisvei, I'll ask you on this. If you have this is a trephus issue, it's going to be a question of chazaka. You've got a pin, needle, thank you, that is found in the thickness of like the flaps of, this is one of the stomachs here of the cow, where basically it's like this case of like these folded flaps of skin, and only if the needle, there's a hole that goes all the way through all the flaps, right, into the inner organ, is it considered a treifa. If it only goes through, the outer skin, like the outer flaps, but doesn't pierce all the way through, it's not a treifa. So you find this needle. If the hole is only on one side, it's kosher. If it's flush, treifa, the animal's a treifa. If there's a drop of blood, now let's say it does go from side to side, but the question is, did it come before or after the shechita? Now this is obviously a treifa question, but it's also the dinei mamanis question. I go ahead and I sell Charlie there, my cow, and Charlie's a shochet, and I'm the cattle herder or whatever it's called, and Charlie's a shochet, and he buys my cow, and he shechs it, whatever, he shechs it, and he finds that it was a treifa. So can he basically say makach tos? Now that's an interesting question anyway. How am I supposed to know whether it's a treifa? And you could assume that that's like cost of doing business. You have to assume that a certain percentage are going to be treifas. But okay, let's bracket some of that and still assume that if it's under some circumstance, if it's a found treifa, he can get his money back. Okay, let's say we don't know if it's a treifa. because it's got the hole, but we don't know that this hole come from before he shechted it, which would have made it a treifa, or after he shechted it. Okay, so the question of whether it's a treifa is also a question whether Charlie can come back to me and ask for his money back. Okay. So nimsa le'koratam, there's a drop of blood. B'yadua shu lifnei shvita. Clearly it came from before shvita and it's a treifa. Lo nimsa le'koratam, if there's no drop of
blood on the needle.
On the needle, right? Then b'yadua shu la'achar shvita. Then the only way it would make a hole if it came after shvita. Now, huglid. Now let's say there is a drop of blood, but the blood has now crusted over. Okay, piyamaka. So it's crusted. So now, so it's crusted over the opening of the wound.
The opening now is like scabbed. Right?
Scabbed with blood. So clearly it was from before shechita. But here's the question: it was before shechita, but was it before or after I sold it to Charlie? Okay, Charlie bought it a week ago. Okay, or he bought it 2 days ago, right? And so we know that it got this problem before shechita. But it's sort of like, when did the donkey die? When did it swallow this pin, this needle, before or after I sold it to him? Okay, so if it has a scab, then a scab takes 3 days. So if I sold it to Charlie within the last 2 days, and after shechting it, he found a scab, then we know the problem was around when I sold it to him, and he can ask for his money back. If it isn't scabbed over, and then we don't know, it's not scabbed, and I sold it to him 2 days ago, so we know it didn't happen 3 days ago, but did it happen 2 days ago or 1 day ago, right? When did this? So we know that it was before shechita. We know it happened recently, but we don't know whether before or after I sold it to Charlie. So what's the halacha? Charlie, you want your money back? You prove to me that thing was there from before I sold it to you. Okay, what? So he can't. Which basically means
cow in the sewing barn with all the needles.
Okay, which basically means that I win. Now, isn't this similar to the case of the cow and the donkey? Right? I got the cow, like here, right? In this case, if you want to get your cow back, you prove to me when the donkey died, right? And so it's like saying, like, so if Charlie wants to get his money back, he gave me the money, prove to me when the animal became a treifa. So that seems like the burden of proof is on the one who wants to take the money away, which is not what Shmuel said. Shmuel said that even though I've got the cow, I have the burden of proof. So the Gemara said,
which is more important, the money or the cow? The one who's trying to get the cow?
No, in the case of the cow, there was no money. It was a cow for a donkey. So the cow was like the cow was like the money.
Here the cow is no money.
Right. Here's the right. Okay, so basically, this is clear that if you want to reverse it, then if you want your money back, you prove it. If you want your cow back, you prove it. Okay, so the Gemara says, so if Charlie there, who's the shochet, if he wants his money back, he has to bring a proof to get his money back. So that how is that different than the cow and the donkey? The amai bala behema lacy raya v'nekum. So according to Shmuel's argument, it should be my responsibility to prove that the sale was binding, right? You get it? The money is sort of like receiving the cow, right? Yeah, you got it? So I have the money. So if Shmuel says, when I got the cow, I still have to prove it was a good sale, with the dead donkey. If I've got the money, according to Shmuel, why shouldn't I have to prove it was a good sale? So the Gemara says, no, we're talking. We don't really mean that the shochet has to bring a proof. And that he gave the money and he has to bring a proof. He didn't give the money. What we're really saying is Charlie didn't give the money, and if I want to get the money from Charlie, I've got to prove it. But really, what we're saying is it goes totally against the simple read of the Mishnah, right? This basic right, or the Breita, this basic right said the guy, if you want your money back, you bring the proof, and the Gemara, which is exactly against Shmuel. And the Gemara is saying that's not what it means. What it really means is, it means the opposite. It really means that the guy who I sold him, I'm the one who sold him the cow. Whether I have the money or don't have the money, I have the burden of proof. Okay, to make it consistent with Shmuel, that the guy that I've got to prove to Charlie that it was an okay sale, even if I've got whether I have the money or not. So the Gemara says, Umay Piska. What allows you to say that the Breita here is talking like it says the burden of proof is on the one who's coming to take the money, and you're trying to say that's not what it means. It doesn't mean what allows you to sort of read it that it's always the seller who's got the burden of proof. right? That's not what it says.
How are you getting to
My Piska means what allowed you to sort of make the make the Mishnah categorical. The Mishnah said the burden of proof is on the person who's coming to take out the money. And you're saying it's not the person who's coming to take out the money. It'll be a case where the money hasn't paid, and what it really means is that the burden of proof is always on the seller. What allows you to read the Mishnah like that? Okay, Ella, so it seems that that's clearly a case where the burden of proof logically is on the one who doesn't have the, who's coming to take out the money. So it's either Charlie wants his money back, he has the burden of proof. If Charlie wants his cow back and there's a dead donkey, he's got the burden of proof, not me.
What do you mean by categorically? What do you mean by reading Mishnah categorically?
Meaning that the Mishnah, let's read the answer. Ella, ki also Rami bar Yecheskel Amar, when Rami bar Yecheskel came, he said, Lo titzaisinu lani klali b'chai Yehuda achi mishmei Shmuel, because we started with that with Rabbi Yehuda in the name of Shmuel. He says, don't listen to the principles that Yehuda, my brother, said in the name of Shmuel, because they were brothers. Hachi amar Shmuel. So forget everything we said. What we said was wrong because it was crazy, right? What we were saying. Why should it be the responsibility of the guy who sold the donkey? He now has a cow in his possession. Here's what Shmuel really said: Kol shenolot safek b'rashuso alav haraya. Wherever the sort of doubt arose, that's who has the proof. What does that mean? The Tanatuna Kala, and we teach like this by the case of Kala. So the case of the Kala, we're going back to that earlier explanation, right? Which is that if the donkey died, if the mum is found in the Kala's house, she has the raya. If the mum is found in the groom's house after the nisuin, he's got the burden of proof. So similarly here, what would be the translation here by the case of the donkey? So the case would be, let me just check what Rashi says about this. Hold on. Yeah, so Rashi says it's basically the same point here. It's because since I took the cow into my possession, okay, once I took the cow into my possession, it's not exactly the same, because here we really know, was she in her father's house or was she in her groom's house? But here conceptually, it's when I took the cow into my possession, which is a presumption that now it's your donkey. Since there's a presumption that it's your donkey, that it was a good sale, and then we find a dead donkey, that's like it was a problem that came up with you. There was a presumption you owned the donkey. We found the dead donkey. That's your problem. If you want to prove that it was the opposite, you have the burden of proof. So you get it? When the Kala is found to have a mum in the father's house, it's her problem. She's got to prove. If the problem is found after the chuppah, it's his problem. He's got to prove. So in parallel, I took the cow. You're presumed to own the donkey. We find a dead donkey. That's your problem. And if you want to prove it's something else, well, it's the exact opposite of what's quoted before in the name of Shmuel. If you want to prove opposite, you've got the burden of proof. Okay? Let's just get to the two dots. Okay? So the Gemara says, okay, Meisvei, Machat Shenim Sabovi Beis HaKosos, etc. The Delo Yoiv Tavach Damei. So here, by that case about the needle, it's not a question of who's rishus. It's a question of who's got the money. Charlie has got the cow. Okay, he shechs it. He finds the hole in it. So the problem occurred in Charlie's domain. It was his cow. He had the cow. He shechted it. He found the problem. But nevertheless, that brisa says who's got the burden of proof? The person who wants to extract the money. So if Charlie hasn't paid me yet, who's got the burden of proof? I have the burden of proof, right? If he hasn't paid me, if I want to get his money. So that's not the question, whose domain did it occur in? That's the simple question of who wants the money? Who needs to be paid, right? So the Gemara says, if Charlie hasn't paid the money, I have to bring the proof, and if I want to get the money out of Charlie, which is what we would normally say. The guy who wants to get the money is the one of the burden of proof. According to you, that's not the logic. The logic is not who wants to get the money. The logic is where did the problem occur? So the problem was discovered in the cow when Charlie already had the cow and shechted it, so that should define it as Charlie's problem. So the Gemara says no. The Yavitai Dameh. We're only talking about a case where Charlie's already paid the money. And since Charlie's already paid the money, when we say the burden of proof is the one who wants to extract the money, it's really a way of saying Charlie always has the burden of proof. Okay, it's sort of like what we tried to do before. We take the Breita says it's about who wants to get the money. We say, no. We're talking about a case where it's presumed that Charlie paid the money. So it's just a way of saying Charlie always has the burden of proof. why not just say the butcher always got the burden of proof? Okay, but the Gemara says, "Umay piska," like it said before. What allows you to sort of say categorically, that if it says it's about who wants to collect the money, what allows you to read it that it's always the case that Charlie paid the money, and it really means that Charlie's always the one who has to prove it? Stama de Milsa, no, because we can presume that the normal way is because the normal thing is that Charlie is assumed to be always the one who has paid the money, because I won't give you my cow unless I get the cash. Okay, so what it's really saying is, what we really got is, I know we did that a little quickly, but what we really got is that it started by this very bizarre idea that the guy who sold the donkey, he's got the cow in his possession, he's got the cheskas haguf, and all of that he has to go ahead and prove it. That didn't make any sense. We normally say if you want to extract the money, you've got to prove it. We have the case about extracting the money, about a case when the animal became a treifa. So we reversed it. But we didn't fully reverse it to say when whoever is trying to extract the money needs to prove it. We said wherever the problem crops up, that's where the burden of proof is. If the problem crop up in her house, she's got the burden of proof. If the crop up in his house, he's got the burden of proof. The problem is it didn't fit in with the case about the case of the treifa. Because the case of the treifa said our more normal principle, which is if you want to say it was not a good sale or whatever, if you want, whoever wants to take money from somebody else, they have the burden of proof. If Charlie's already paid me and he wants to reverse the sale, he's got to prove it. If he hasn't paid me and I want to prove that it was a good sale, I've got to prove it. Okay, so that's the way it sounded like. That the question was who's trying to take the money. We reread it to say no. It really means that Charlie, since the problem was found with the animal when Charlie was checking it and was Charlie's possession, that's where it was found. That's where the burden of proof is. The proof is always on Charlie. So I can even make Charlie pay, even if he hasn't paid yet. He's got the burden of proof. So why did it say, the one who wants to get the money back is the one who has that burden of proof? It really didn't mean the one who wants to get the money back. It really meant the butcher always has the burden of proof. It's describing him as the one who wants to get the money back because it presumes that the butcher wouldn't have the cow unless he had paid the money. But it really didn't mean it. That's what I know. That's what bothered the Gemara before. If the legal principle is the butcher has to bring the proof, say the butcher has to bring the proof. Don't say the one who wants to extract the money. Oh, and of course we mean the butcher because we're assuming the butcher is the one that's already paid the money. And so what you really do have is you really have these two different approaches. Well, you got the first shmur that seemed to make no sense. But even in the end, you got one approach that really parallels this. The burden of proof is on the person where the problem was discovered, and you have the more standard approach, which is the burden of proof is on the person who wants to extract the money.
Also,
okay.
We'll
end with that.
Nobody would ever give anybody any credit.
Right?
So maybe that was originally the case, and they're like, well, you know what, this isn't going to work. Nobody's going to